This is the County Line Podcast, a production of Free Speech America. And now, here are your hosts, Kris Ranney, Garth Hilton, and Kevin Virgil.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the County Line Podcast. We are so grateful that you are here with us today. As usual, we are here in the Free Speech America virtual studios. We want to say thank you to Free Speech America and everyone who has supported free speech throughout your lifetime, hopefully, but especially since, COVID and all that has been transpiring in America for the last 5 years. So, and all of the wokeness and those issues. Here's the thing. If we don't use our free speech, then there's something that's going to fill in the silence. And if those aren't our voices for freedom and liberty, then it's going to be someone else's voices. So this is why we gather here every week. So thank you for joining us for this next great episode of the County Line Podcast, where we are learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. So it's the normal cadre of Liberty Bandits at the county line today. I'm Garth Hilton here with Kevin Virgil and Kris Ranney, and it's great to see you guys again.
Hey guys, good to be here. Been a crazy
morning,
week,
Garth.
but I'm
Absolutely
excited.
and enjoying this glorious weather.
Loving it. It has been wonderful.
I don't know about you guys, but I've come to the place, as crazy as my life, and it's been crazy this week. But I've come to look forward to Wednesday mornings because it's almost like a forced stop, and then let's talk and think about things that are important instead of just constantly running with all the fires I'm putting out right now. So glad to see you.
Indeed. Very good. So let's see. What do we have lined up for this episode? But first, I do want to say that our mission here, our purpose on the County Line Podcast is to connect with and mobilize ordinary Americans just like us. That's what we're choosing to do with our time on Wednesday mornings, is to get together, mobilize the three of us to hopefully find other Americans like you that are listening who will find other Americans and to mobilize in their local communities for liberty so we can all learn and live liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. And so that's what we're about. We're grateful to be here and look forward to what's going to happen on this episode. So what are we going to throw down on the kitchen table this morning?
I've got two topics that I've been thinking on, and maybe am not certainly an expert, but am interested in learning more. And I think between the three of us, we can tease out some good information. I'd like to talk about Congressman Steve King. I consider him a friend of mine, and I have a lot of admiration and appreciation for him. And in the past 10 years or so, he has been what I consider an example of one of the first politicians, super conservative politicians, who suffered cancellation. And at the time it was going on, I think it was before Americans were aware of what being canceled was. But I think looking back now, we can see that. And so I would like to talk about that. The other topic I'd like to talk about is another nonprofit. It's an organization called the Weston A group, and foundation. Thank you. And they're big promoters of healthy eating, nutrient dense foods, healthy lifestyles. And we have a chapter here in Western Iowa, and we've had the opportunity to meet with one of the leaders of that, and are working to bring them in for an interview in the coming weeks. And one of the things we've talked about in this group is we really like the idea of MAHA, making America healthy again. And so if we can promote that here on a local level, that's kind of one of our reasons for interest in that. So that's my things.
Yeah, I tell you, Weston A. Price, they were MAHA long before MAHA was a thing. But then many things were MAHA long before MAHA became a thing. So, but I love that. So I really look
Yeah,
forward
I
to.
think the 40s, like the guy who it's named after, who started it. Yeah, he's not even with us anymore, but it's been going on for probably 60, 70, 80 years. So, yeah.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, as far as, I mean, anything else, and you guys know how much I really hate to take the focus off of local things, but this does impact us locally. I mean, I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the clean CR and, how it is that the Republican Party and even conservatives became proud of a clean CR that would continue the insane spending that's been going on in Washington, D.C. But anyways, other than that, how about you, Kevin? Anything on your mind?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, I think we should definitely give some mention to this. This little this tension that's sprung up with the CR between within the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, between Trump supporters on one hand and Thomas Massie supporters on the other. But getting back to a local level, I'd like to talk about some news that happened just this past week in South Dakota when the state governor signed a law banning the use of eminent domain by CO2 pipelines, which I think is a direct result of community activism at a very local level. So I'd like to talk about that, and I don't think that's received the coverage it probably should have. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
good.
great.
Good. Perfect.
So where should we start?
All right. Well, Kris, do we have any sponsors today that you want to talk about?
I do. Yes, we do. So, actually, our primary sponsor, the organization that's sponsoring the development and the initiation of this podcast, is a nonprofit group here in Southwest Iowa called Free Speech America. And it actually, I actually happen to be the chair of it, and Garth is on the board among a couple others. And yeah, I just wanted to share with you guys just 30 seconds about that. I'm going to pull up my screen. If you give me just a moment.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful way to bring together all kinds of people, whether it's at our 4th of July celebrations that we've done for the last 4 years, or if it's at our various events that we host for public discussions about all kinds of controversial topics, but important topics, things that really can change people's lives. And so, yeah, it's been a wonderful part of Southwest Iowa and the freedom movement here. So,
well, and you can see on the screen, we've got just some basic information about it. We exist, Free Speech America exists for preserving our God-given American freedoms to speak, hear, debate, determine truth, and act upon it. And it is a nonpartisan network of patriotic Americans. Our goal has been, we've been going for about 4 years. Our goal has been educating, organizing, and activating people to respond to threats with our freedom and just to be active and vocal about it. And so I'm just bopping around our website, and this is our 4th of July, one of our 4th of July events, which are amazing. Yeah, so we've done a lot of events in the past with a lot of speakers. Basically, at least as the director, I get myself in trouble a little bit, but we've done, like I said, we've had speakers come in, we've done presentations, and we choose the topics based on this one question. If the topic or the issue is being canceled, or we are being forbidden or discouraged from talking about it, then that's what we're going to talk about. So that's kind of been my modus for it. So so Free Speech America is sponsoring this, and I encourage you guys to check them out. We'll be talking more about it in the future. And
yes.
Yeah. So.
And if you wanted to support the podcast, please go to freespeechamerica.org and donate. That's a great way that you could help support us as we're just getting this thing kickstarted. So thank you very much.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, so Free Speech America is sponsoring this, and I encourage you guys to check them out. We'll be talking more about it in the future. And yeah. So
All right. I don't know. I'd say let's start with the pipeline, because that is such an important thing. And it's not been getting enough play. This is the first time I've heard about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't really received a lot of coverage, maybe on over here in Iowa. But so what happened last week was the governor of the state of South Dakota signed a law that had been passed both the House and the Senate at the state level, and that this law now bans the use of eminent domain by any pipeline that's not considered a common carrier, right? Which is, Summit, like the state Supreme Court in South Dakota ruled that Summit is not. That effectively slams the door shut on Summit Carbon Solutions and their intention to build this the CO2 pipeline that would collect CO2 from dozens of ethanol plants in Iowa, but also in South Dakota, all the way up into North Dakota, where it would terminate at some yet undetermined point. What's interesting about this is, and look, I don't think anybody on this podcast has any problem with Summit building a business, like wish them all the success in the world. But where we come to loggerheads is when they were attempting to use their political connections to enforce eminent domain judgments against family-owned farms, right? Families have owned their farms for well over 100 years, and using their political connections to force eminent domain when there's very clearly not a public purpose for what they're attempting to do, right? I don't think anybody can make the argument that capturing CO2 and removing it from the atmosphere satisfies the public good. There certainly may be a business case for them to do that, but this isn't the same as building like an oil pipeline from Alberta down to Oklahoma, right? This is not what we're talking about. This is it's a private enterprise. And I think what happened where Summit, I think where it all went wrong for them was, I was just on another call earlier today talking about this. 2 summers ago, I remember, it was either June or July of 2023. And, Summit, in a very heavy-handed maneuver, they wanted to go onto a farmer's land up in South Dakota, a guy named Jared Bosley, and they wanted to survey his land as part of their permitting process. And he had no intention of signing their easement agreement, taking their money. So they went to the county court and got a judge to allow them to come onto the land without his consent, land that he owned. And so what Summit did was, they could have been reasonable about it, but they waited until he was off his property. He was off, farming somebody else's land one day, and they like basically, bulldozed onto his land with a convoy with like several sheriff's deputies, scared the heck out of his wife. And they were trying to provoke a confrontation, that would have ended with the farmer in handcuffs, right? But he didn't take the bait. So what he did was he started a movement. I remember hearing about this when there were several hundred protesters at the state capitol 2 summers ago, and I think you could draw a direct line between that day and the Republican primary last June, when over a dozen pro-pipeline legislators in South Dakota were tossed out, right? They had the Liberty Movement had extremely strong support. They ended up voting out over a dozen legislators that were supportive of Summit and their attempts to build a pipeline. And then I think some of it was they were trying to push through this shady legislation that they had deceptively labeled the landowner rights bill, but which would actually, do everything but enforce landowner rights. So that's
such a perfect Marxist title.
Oh, it's Orwellian, right? It's absolutely right. It's it was crazy. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it all culminated in the governor signing this bill into law last week. So now,
nice.
Look, I mean, I understand, there are businesses in South Dakota that feel impacted by this. There were, ethanol plants that obviously employ a lot of people that farmers count on to buy their grain, every October. that are now trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do now, right? How do we stay competitive in this market? We were counting on Summit to help us stay competitive with all of the our big competitors. But I mean, I think that there were many paths that this company could have taken to be more accommodating of property rights, and I think that's where this all fell apart for them.
Yeah. And I want to go ahead and insert here too. There's a foundational problem within the Midwest. I mean, in just corn and ethanol to begin with. That's all a part of an original green boondoggle in terms of let's start making fuel out of food, which also increases the price of food. And it's all subsidized by the federal government to begin with. And so this is just another type of subsidy. Let us take your land subsidy on top of subsidies that are already propelling an industry that probably couldn't survive on its own if it wasn't for the federal government subsidizing it. So, this is just building, unsustainable stacks on top of unsustainable stacks in terms of if it wasn't for the taxpayer paying for these industries, they probably wouldn't exist.
Interesting.
Yeah, look, I think there's a strong argument to be made that there is a place for ethanol in the market, right? Yes, they receive a lot of subsidies, but I mean, realistically, the only real support they receive from the federal government is the renewable fuels mandate, which says that 50% of every gallon of gasoline that we refine and turn into gasoline needs to contain ethanol. And beyond that, I mean, when you look at the subsidies that ethanol receives as an industry, I mean, it pales in comparison to say what the oil and gas industry receives, particularly like the extractive side of it. So I hear you, right? I mean, the fact is that I'm trying to be realistic about this. Like in a perfect world, the government wouldn't have to subsidize anything, but it does. And I think we could certainly argue that there should be more of a microscope taken to how our taxpayer dollars are used, but at the same time, we are where we are with the ethanol business, and it's here to stay. I certainly think that it's definitely a driver of growth that our state and our part of the country definitely needs. I certainly don't think that we should be placing primacy of the ethanol industry over the property rights of farmers, right? I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I think that was a significant mistake.
Yeah, something that occurs to me, and I thought earlier, and then you just reminded me of it too. I feel like there's been a shift in terms of Americans, especially within MAGA or conservative movement. There's been a shift back towards sovereignty and personal freedom. And I think, if they had gotten all this pipeline stuff passed through maybe in the last 4 to 5 years, it might have been successful. But I think the American people have kind of woken up to being taken advantage of, with all the fraud we're looking at in our federal government and just politicians using their power to make deals and benefit certain people and not others. I just think Americans are tired of that. And I feel like that's hopefully going to be a trend we'll see, like in regards to eminent domain, that fewer and fewer people in each state, and I hope Iowa, follows suit, are willing to put up with that. And I feel like more Americans are waking up and saying, no, that's not okay. And we can do something about it. And so just like in South Dakota, where there was obviously a groundswell to combat that, I hope and pray we see that in Iowa as well. But do you think that part of it is the politicians that got voted out because they were supporting it, as well as the companies or the corporations that are promoting it? Do you feel like they're kind of at the point where they're not reading the room? they've lost touch with where Americans are headed. And
I like to think that, right? Wouldn't we all? I mean, yeah, that's certainly the case in South Dakota, whereas, in Iowa, we took exactly the opposite approach, where every pipeline legislator was reelected, right? I think we only lost one. Actually, as I recall, he actually won his race, but then almost immediately resigned for, I believe, health reasons. But, Iowa decided to reelect every pipeline politician. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that there was such a different outcome in our state versus theirs. I think broadly, I agree with you that there's definitely been an awakening. I think COVID was the wake up call for a whole lot of people. I think when we ultimately realized that all of these institutions that we've just reflexively trusted our entire lives, schools, doctors, hospitals, government at every level, I think we all just reflexively assumed they were working in our best interest. We always, we complain about them, but we would just assume that they were good actors. And now suddenly everybody's like, wait a second, like these are not good actors, right? There are actually a lot of bad actors at a high level that are trying to vaccinate my kids with experimental gene therapies, teaching my kids things that, that they definitely should not, that have no place in a public classroom. And frankly, wasting my tax dollars, and in many cases, just putting it in their own pockets, or even worse, using those tax dollars against my interests. So yeah, I think there's been a broad awakening over the last 5 years. It's been an extremely fascinating time to be, I guess politically focused in this country, to see the pendulum swing back in the other direction. Right. I think it's a great segue into the next point that you wanted to talk about, Kris, which is this continuing resolution that was just barely passed in Congress, where one Republican voted against it, and he's now in the president's crosshairs.
Right. Yeah. Before we go on to the CR, I do want to say, though, that just in general, I mean, whenever there is a government choosing winners and losers in the market through subsidies, this is not market capitalism. It's crony capitalism, and it harms, I think, the best that could come from free markets. And so, yeah, there's this sense of like, oh, well, it's nice to dream dreams or whatever, but, let's be in reality. Well, for me, the point is if we're not moving the Overton window to free markets and getting rid of crony capitalism and the K Street lobbyists and so forth that are in there buying these votes to maintain this crony system, then I don't know, does America ever become free and really exemplifying what reality could be through free market capitalism? So, and, the CR is, a blank check for until September or October of saying, let's just continue all of the spending regardless. And it's a real big disappointment. It's a betrayal, really, as far as I'm concerned, because we were told in December, oh, let's just do the CR until the new administration is in, has its feet underneath them, and then we'll fight. It's the Republicans being loosey again with the football. So, yeah, and I know there's all kinds of good, again, dreams like, oh, well, if we do it this time, then yes, we promise we're really going to fight next time. And I'm still here holding my breath, about ready to pass out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, and it's been interesting for me because I'm thinking new thoughts. I'm trying to grasp concepts in terms of how our government works, and of course we've got this new introduction with Doge and what Doge is doing. And so what I'm trying to do is then connect together what Doge is doing as far as looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And then how then does that translate and connect with funding and things that Congress is doing, with our budget? And I'm not quite sure I've got my mind around it, but yeah, there seems to be a problem because we've identified all this, and I think it's correct. I trust that what DOJ is finding is correct, but at the same time, then how does Congress not respond to that in terms of how they're looking, at budget? And, is USAID funded through, I'm not that familiar with the CR. So, is all the same baloney still just funded like it was before?
Yes, the same levels of spending continue.
Right. Yeah. There's been no change. Congress just, and this is why Trump is having so many problems with the, these federal judges that are stepping in to stop, a lot of his attempts to shut down this rampant spending, is because, the judge's argument is made, look, like, the Congress has the right to determine the federal budget, right? The president's job to execute, and to oversee the agencies that spend the money from that budget. Like, the president doesn't get to decide, which line items in the budget get removed, right? As long as Congress is approving these budgets, then, that's the president's creating a constitutional crisis if he tries to override congressional authority. And as long as you have these. As long as we have like a weak Congress that isn't willing to take a hard line on budget cuts, right? Because they've got all these interests, like chirping in their ears. Look, say what you will about Thomas Massie, but he's the only, as far as I could tell, he's the only principled Republican in the entire building on this one, right?
Yeah.
And
with the CR, I'm really disappointed in the Freedom Caucus. I mean,
yeah, being
willing to beat Charlie Brown one more time.
Well, like you said, right? They all claim that they just needed to get the CR passed, to give the president some overhead cover. Well, now you know what? He's in office. Like, we don't need to spend as usual. We can make meaningful cuts to wasteful government programs like the Department of Education. Certainly a big chunk of the military budget, and there's no political will to do that. So it's very. It was disheartening to see, like the president, like talking about how he's going to like primary Massie, which, by the way, is going to fail, right? Massie is thinking about running for Senate, by the way, and he has insane support nationwide at this point because he's the only, he's the only legislator that's willing, like, to do what, like, like Rand Paul and Ron Paul always did, which is to say, no, I'm not going to support this. So
I'd rather see him run for Kentucky governor, get some good red state governors.
Right. Yeah, we certainly need more of those. I think we need principled voices on Capitol Hill as well.
Right.
Even if we only have one or two. I mean,
yeah. A question for you guys in regards to this. I don't know how much I would, I guess, agree with it, but some people, some podcasters I've listened to are suggesting that part of the reason this CR is moving forward and part of the reason Trump is taking the stance he is on it is that his ultimate goal is to out or help Americans wake up to the fact that their elected representatives, if you want to assume they're elected, but another topic, but their representatives are not really working on our behalf. And, by saying, okay, we can cut all this money and save all this waste and fraud, but over here you've got your congressmen and your senators that are voting to continue this going. And, I guess that's a theory that's why it's happening, is so that Americans can say, oh, well, DOJ is doing all this, but here's Ernst or whoever still voting on spending all this money. And it's, just to, I guess, wake us up. What do you think about that theory?
No, my theory on that is, in terms of it being an administration, like we're going to reveal, the real problem behind the curtain of Oz. No, it was them totally quashing the Freedom Caucus, and Trump anyways has been destroying the Freedom Caucus at a federal level his entire time in control of the GOP for the last 7, 8 years. And he's the one that, unfortunately, I guess, was able, with his political power, to bring the Freedom Caucus to heel. And so, no, I wouldn't say it's him like trying to, reveal like, oh, see how Congress is doing such bad things and I'm your hero. I would have done the right thing. No, this is Trump's CR. I don't think this would have happened if it wasn't Trump putting his fingers on the scale here, his thumb on the scale. So,
yeah, that's right. Look, I mean, when you're operating at that level, at 100,000 feet, you have to make some big decisions that are going to be extremely unattractive to people at the grassroots level to do to pursue your agenda, right? So, look, I mean, as far as like this perception that our members of Congress aren't voting in our interest, look, that's absolutely right. It's a financially driven decision. Like I can tell you, like when I ran for office, right, I was often frustrated because I would, as somebody who ran for office but hasn't actually won a congressional election just yet, it's frustrating when we go meet with people, and everybody, they'll come listen to you, they'll pat you on the head and tell you what a great job you're doing, but like nobody donates to your campaign, right? Maybe you get like $10 here, $25 there. Meanwhile, AI PAC is coming in to fund your opponent with like hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? As are all these other special interest groups, Blue Cross Blue Shield, the healthcare industry. I mean, pick your industry, right? Whether it's big ag, big tech, they all have their lobbying groups, and there's enormous amounts of money flowing. The vast majority of your legislators are spending most of their time not legislating but fundraising, right? That's just the reality of their office. Like they spend more time fundraising than they do actually doing their jobs, because they're especially for your members of Congress who are running for re-election every 2 years, right? If you're not Steve King in a safe Republican seat or Nancy Pelosi in a safe Democrat seat, you're constantly fundraising, right? And that that comes with trade-offs, right? Like you're not going to find, like the reason Joni Ernst has been bought and paid for by all these special interests is because that's the only way she can stay in office, right? So she's wholly owned by Big Ag, by Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the other big donors. It's not, she's not funded by Kevin and Kris and Garth on Main Street. And I guess that's unfortunate, but in our current system, if a member of Congress can't be reelected based on small dollar donations, which happens in some districts but not in many, then that's just the reality that we're dealing with.
So here, I'd like to go to the root cause of this as well. I mean, the only time George Washington stood up and spoke during the formation of the Constitution was when it came to the size of representation that was supposed to be thought of as reasonable. And there was a fight at the time. I think it was either 50 or 40,000, but Washington was like, that's far too many people to be representing. It needs to be 30,000 people. And right now we have representatives and senators who are representing 1 million people.
Mm-hmm.
So, June 18th, 1929, with the passage of the Permanent Apportionment Act, we're only limited to these amount of representatives now, which is completely against the founders' intentions and desires. And it's actually still open as an open amendment to the Constitution. And if we simply went and got, I think it's 27 more states to ratify this, then we could change the nature of politics in America for the good by making representation sizes much smaller. Because right now, there's no way that one person can represent 1 million people, or for you to know that individual and be able to have influence over them. You can't walk across some of these people's districts that they represent. But the original intent of the founders was that this is supposed to be a very small kind of like county-like representation, not massive cities of urbanization that completely sway votes in one state just because of the size of the megatropolis in that state. So I don't know, that's a little soapbox of mine. That would really improve politics in America if we could change that.
Yeah, that's a good point about having more lower level representation. I also think that one of the worst mistakes this country ever made was passing the 17th Amendment, which was, before that was passed, I can't remember the exact year, but prior to that time, senators were elected by their state legislatures in the states that they represented, right? Whereas the 17th Amendment allowed the general public to elect senators. Think about how differently our country would be run if the state legislatures were the constituents that represent that elected senators, and how much more responsive the federal government would be to the wishes of the state legislature. Because, like you said, Garth, like we don't have, the individual doesn't have a lot of influence with their U.S. congressman, but they can have a lot of influence on their local state legislator, right?
Right.
I think that would
really
be
interesting, right?
That would be a great way to revert to exactly what you're talking about.
Well, and unfortunately, all those amendments and moves, whether intentional or not, of course, like I said, I'm becoming more cynical the older I get, but it's all moving toward more control for the federal government, more control for the politicians, less control for the people. And so it's not a good direction. So.
No, I agree. By the way, this is a pet peeve of mine. I'm gonna. So that 17th Amendment was ratified into law in the year 1913. What else happened in 1913? That's when the Federal Reserve was established.
Fed was created, yeah.
Two of the most destructive decisions, in my opinion, ever inflicted upon the American government.
Federal Reserve, and also wasn't the confiscation of gold?
No, that was 1931. That was under Roosevelt.
1931. Yeah. Soon after.
33, 34. Yeah, Roosevelt was. He was the president in 31. But
I don't know if you guys have really delved into it, but the whole creation of the Federal Reserve, it's dark. I mean, if you look at, there's some conspiracy theories about it, and even if they're half true, it's dark. It's not really an official organization or function of the government. It was created by Vanderbilt, and
it's a wild story. Yeah, like the top secret, covert train trips.
We need to get an expert on that.
That would be fun, and I've got one that could talk on that, and and that's some of the theories. It's like, is Trump trying to kibosh the Federal Reserve? I mean, there's some talk about that, or roll it in under the Treasury. I don't know. I don't know how much of that's true, and I don't know that I know enough about it that I could say that's a good thing or a bad thing. But it's interesting. Okay, we'll add that to our list of special guests. We've got about a dozen right now, so. Yeah,
indeed. Well, I look forward to having Steve King on next week and to tackle a lot of these subjects, especially concerning the CO2 pipeline in Iowa, as well as, maybe talking about subsidies and the harms that they do to the market and so forth. But really look forward to hearing from him. And I know that we had a great meeting with Melissa, who's heading up Weston A Price here in Western Iowa, and looking forward to having her on here as well soon, and to kind of talk about MAHA, even though in terms of the freedom that MAHA brings, because I'm probably not maybe the most healthy eating person, although I know I should be more healthy, but that there's a lot of MAHA before MAHA was a thing. And unfortunately, I think in some respects, in terms of negative efficacy in vaccines and things of that nature, MAHA is really a foil that is hurting the medical freedom movement. But in many regards, though, there were people that were MAHA before MAHA was a thing, and Weston A. Price is one of those. And I really look forward to having them on and learning more about their organization because they work locally. They have local chapters all across the nation, and I really look forward to that. So I don't know if you had more that you wanted to kind of present on that, Kris, or not, but
yeah, I'm just sharing my screen. This is the website for Weston A. Price Foundation. It's a national organization with local chapters, and we have connected with our local rep here in this area and are trying to work with them to see maybe about doing something collectively with them, but certainly working to get them on as a special guest just to talk about what they're doing. And it's very simple. I kind of bumped into this issue probably 4 or 5 years ago, but their goal is just to be a source, I'll read it to you, for accurate information on nutrition and health, always aiming to provide scientific validation of traditional food ways. People seeking health today often condemn certain food groups such as grains, dairies, meats, salts, fats, sauces, and based on the food pyramid. And I went on a journey about 4 or 5 years ago because I was having all the issues just with joint pain and inflammation. And for a while, I chalked it up to just getting older. But I think after doing some investigation, I started Googling diets that were anti-inflammatory. And I stumbled upon keto. And I started doing keto years ago, lost a bunch of weight, which was great. My ultimate goal was not necessarily that, but was to reduce my joint pain because I just was having so much joint pain. And for me, it was life-changing. And that kind of started me on that whole journey of the food pyramid because, at the bottom, the one we had in grade school, how you eat grains and then dairy. And then at the very top, you eat fats and meats and that sort of thing. And just doing a lot of research because I'm a total nerd. So anything I get into, whether it's gardening or eating or whatever, I totally nerd out on it and study it, but just realized that the food pyramid is upside down and kind of stumbled upon, not exactly the Weston A. Price, but in keto about nutrient dense and kind of what our bodies were built to consume and to function on. So I'm really excited to get to know them. I don't know when we'll have them on, probably in a couple weeks. But just wanted to kind of tease that out.
And again, it's the same song and dance, right? That's a top-down solution, the food pyramid that comes from the federal government that is inspired by K Street lobbyists with big ag and big food production in terms of what's cheap and most profitable to make. Oh, let's get our food pyramid and push it down, especially through the schools, and then have parents think, oh, I'm being a bad parent if I'm not doing such and such. It's anyways, yeah.
Well, and then,
local,
things like
local.
And seed oils. Seed oils are so bad. It's so bad for people. And
I've been going down that rabbit hole. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's bad. And I'm hoping, that'll come out as MAHA gets going. But, one of the interesting things I thought was really fascinating, this is just an anecdotal story, but for instance, let's pick a fruit, bananas. Bananas, as they were 100 years ago, were super healthy, had lots of nutrition in them. But as with most, if not all of our fruit, bananas have been genetically altered to be sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. And so now bananas are not recommended for people that are diabetic because there's so much sugar in them. Well, a banana or an apple or an orange 100 years ago was a healthier piece of fruit for you than they are today because they've been genetically altered to be sweeter and have higher sugar content. So it's a rabbit hole to really get into, what has happened to our food supply over the past, probably even 40, 50 years. But I'm excited because and of course it's easy for me, and I hope you guys agree with me, but it's super easy to tie in healthy eating, making America healthy again to local freedom issues because the healthier we are, the less sick we are, the less dependent we are on medications and health
Correct.
systems, the more powerful we are. And when we're not dealing with health issues and spending hours and hours at the doctors and, spending all our money on medication and dealing with insurance companies, we have more free time to be active and speaking out against things like pipelines, that sort of thing. So
Absolutely.
Yes, indeed.
I roll it all into a big ball. I think it all is part of a certain
Yes.
theme we need to head for. So
Yeah. And that's why, this is really why this podcast exists. It is a place where we are learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. And a big part of this for us is going to be putting together opportunities for people locally in their communities, just by encouraging you to do it yourself. But also, we're going to be trying to put together some initiatives locally with partners like Weston A. Price and others, where some regenerative farming communities and so forth, bring them together under one umbrella in terms of an event, maybe called the Kitchen Table, for Pottawatomie County, or the Kitchen Table for Council Bluffs, where we come together, have a big community potluck, get to know one another, share ideas, and have conversations, and kind of a town hall environment. So, this is something that if you could join in with us and help support us, that would be wonderful as we put together this kind of mobilizing of the local community. And so that's one thing. If you want to even just join in us with prayer and think about, a kitchen table in your community where people come around this kitchen table, maybe help feed the poor that day, those that are in need, and then have great conversations around the kitchen table about local liberty and what that would look like. So I'm really looking forward to that and hope to be able to have our first kitchen table here in the next, hopefully 30 to 60 days or so.
Gotcha.
Fantastic.
So I hate to rush us along, but I am going to have to check out in about 10 minutes.
Me too.
Can we take a few minutes to touch on one of my pet peeves?
Sure.
Okay.
Throw it down on the kitchen table.
I'm throwing it down. I want to talk
ready.
about Steve King. I happen to be a huge fan of Steve King. And I have very few politicians that I can say I have just a general fondness and affection for as this man. I think he's been such a great servant for the state of Iowa in so many ways. I mean, we could name a list as long as our arm, but I think one of the reasons I like him is because he's super outspoken, and I think he's very principled, and he stands for what he thinks is right. And I think even before Trump came up with MAGA, Make America Great Again, Steve King was all about MAGA, Make Iowa Great Again. And I think he really represents the interests of his constituents in his state with integrity. And so I just want to start out with that. But an interesting case study, and of course we can all very fluently talk about the issue of being canceled, politically canceled, because I think today, looking back over the last 4 to 5 years, we have seen a case study on what the left has done in terms of canceling people that don't fall in line with, whatever the mantra or the belief system is. And I think we are privy and more aware of it now than we have ever been in the past. But when I then take the whole concept of cancellation and what's happened with Trump or any other politician in terms of, making up stories or exaggerating stories to disqualify them, I look back in the past, and I think back, probably my first thought as far as the first person or first politician I know that was canceled, or that I can think of that was canceled, is Steve King. He ran into some difficulty over the last 5 to 7, 8 years with some statements that he said. And while I will grant that some of the statements maybe were inartful or maybe could have been said a different way, I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I feel like the great majority of the problem was created by the media in taking things out of context or making them sound differently than they were. And at the time, Americans, Iowans, were susceptible to that. And especially even our elected leaders, because I feel like when Steve ran into some of the difficulties he did, of course, it was a different environment, very fearful. And anytime anybody was slightly tainted or canceled, their friends in the state houses or in DC, rather than standing up for them and saying, no, this isn't true, they just drop people like hot potatoes and move on to somebody else. I'm pretty certain that's why we ended up with Feenstra instead of King. So anyway,
I could confirm
that's
that.
my topic.
I could confirm that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, in terms of having a disruptor from Iowa in the House, Steve was a freedom disruptor in the House. And for whatever reason, the powers that be here in Iowa didn't like that. They like to send milk toast to DC, and people that will give in to K Street all the time. So, yeah, I have no doubt that this was mostly a uniparty feeding the fuel to the media about King, because he could have easily been defended here in Iowa by his constituents if it wasn't for the Iowa GOP wanting to oust him.
Oh, look, I could tell you firsthand that the Republican leadership in Iowa was actively shopping around for somebody to primary him in 2019 when that fake New York Times story broke against him. And I think Feenstra was actually like the fifth person they talked to. Feenstra was I think they finally found somebody who said, sure, give me a bunch of money and I'll run against King. And I think the first four people that they approached turned him down. And I've actually talked to one of the people who was, part of that group that was looking for a primary opponent for him. So this was absolutely, it was a coordinated attack, both from Des Moines and from DC.
I agree. And just, it's a little bit of a rabbit trail, Kevin, but it kind of riffs off of what you said. And again, that's another pet peeve I have, but it plays into it, is that our candidates who are running, even from state down to county levels, are handpicked or hand recruited by people in Des Moines, by the RPI.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and we have the most contemptible federal representatives in the entire country in this state.
And I'm a cynic, but I'm also an idealist. So it's like the white wolf and the black wolf fight within me. But I'm cynical in that I just find it ridiculous that all those decisions are made by a few people. But I'm also an idealist in knowing that the way our Constitution's written, the way it's supposed to work, is that our candidates who represent us, and this is for any position, be it supervisors or city council or state reps or whatever, they're supposed to come up from the ground. They're supposed to come up from the grassroots, and we're supposed to pick people in our area that we think represent, say, Pot County or Southwest Iowa well. And those are the people that we choose and put forth to go to these halls of power to represent us. And it's not the way the Republican Party's working. And I'll get myself in hot water, but I feel like it's backwards. It's like it's coming from Des Moines and it gets pushed down to the county level and say, oh, this is who we want you to vote for. This is who we want you to support. And I just can't abide it, but I don't know what to do to fix that.
Well, I could tell you there's one thing that'll fix it. It's that we get more than 9% of Republican voters to actually vote in the primary, right? I mean, the vast majority of voters in this state and in this country are more than happy to sit on their hands and let the party choose their Republican nominees, and then the party doesn't do any promotion or any get out the vote activity during the primary because they don't want it. And then as soon as they get their preferred candidate locked in, then it's all hands on deck, and everybody gets to go pull the lever for whatever sleepwalking rhino that the party nominates in June. And everybody gets to pat themselves in the back for doing their civic duty in November, when their real civic duty should have been back in the spring when they had an opportunity to elect like somebody who actually was going to represent the interests of the people, as opposed to getting these, phony Joni or somebody else who's going to sell you down the river for the next 6 years.
And the only way that changes is through exactly what we're doing now, community
Correct.
organizing in every county across America, where conservatives gather together, actually know one another face to face, and are willing to lock arms during primary seasons, find a champion and support them door to door, helping them knock on doors, giving them money, and making sure that we defeat the uniparty. Because it's not just the GOP. Because here's the thing, in most red states, they're really pink. And the reason why they're pink is because it's people who would run as Democrats if they could win as Democrats, but they run as Republicans instead. And so we've got people that have R's behind their names that are really Democrats. And that's what it means to be Republican in name only. And so until we, the people, change this and organize better and become better at that on the GOP side of the slate or the conservative freedom side of the slate, we're not going to have anything different. But that's why, too, I really, hopefully maybe sometime we can have Andy Roth on and talk about the State Freedom Caucus movement and what he and Andy Biggs have been doing, because this is where our liberty lies. It lies locally in the hands of each and every one of us. And if we don't solve it locally, we're never going to solve the criminal cabal in DC.
I agree. Yeah, it starts with us. Well, I'm gonna sign off, but if you guys want to keep talking for a few minutes, I would love for you guys to talk, Kevin, a little bit about so why our participation in the primaries is so low. Is it a problem with apathy or lack of education? People just don't understand. That's one question. My second question or point to discuss then is, how do we fix it? Because I'm super involved with my county Republican Party. And if I could find a brick wall, if I had one and hit my head against that, it would be easier than trying to make changes and do things on a local level, because I was so idealistic, because I love Trump. I love what he's doing. I'm thinking, okay, Trump's trying to promote freedom here. So my job is to promote it and promote conservative values from the ground roots. And so I've been working in that, and man, it's been rough.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people that have come in and gotten involved in our local Republican politics since what's happened in the last 4 years, because they're frightened and they want to get involved, but they come in and they get sucked into this process and just assume that the people that are speaking at the head table are honest and promoting what most Americans believe in, and it's not necessarily the case. And so I guess my second question is, how do you combat that? And Garth and I have been working at that for several years together, but how do you try to make inroads into the actual Republican Party, or do you do something separate like what we're doing with Free Speech America, just do an end run around it and try to promote real conservative values outside of that, and so maybe it's a both and, I don't know. So
it's a real
we can't address it today.
Yeah, I think this requires almost its own episode. It is.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the thing I'm most interested in figuring out, right? How do you get people, off their sofas and out to the voting booth in May or June, right? As well as in November. When the party. Sorry.
Maybe we need a bus, a Free Speech America bus, so we can drive around.
That's what the Democrats do, right? Yeah. Or we, yeah, exactly. Or you can start.
For me, part of it is to stop thinking of ourselves as voters. Like that's our highest civic duty, is to be a voter. I think, if that's our mentality, that's why we have low participation during the primaries. But if we think of ourselves as citizens with responsibilities, duties to defend freedom, and we esteem ourselves more highly as we the people, then there is a chance through this kind of encouragement and civic education.
Right.
From even the point of, guess what? We can get together just as citizens and we can investigate what's going on in our county government or what our representative has been doing in Des Moines. But until we have done this kind of civic engagement, the civic education, and people are willing to engage on a local level, then what the Uniparty of DC, with all of their funding mechanisms, has been very successful at, I would say for over 100 years, is getting us to see ourselves as merely voters, and that the most important time to come out and vote is during a presidential election cycle. We have to break that.
Yes.
We are not merely voters. You can be a slave and be a voter. And I think that's what we have mostly in America right now. People who are fine with their consumeristic.
Yeah,
okay.
likewise.
Yeah, I do too.
I do too. I think this great fodder for next week.
Yes, indeed.
Sounds
All
good.
right. God bless everybody.
Thank you guys.
See you later.
Have a good one.
Everyone. Bye, guys.
Bye now. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for joining us here at the County Line as we learn and live liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. God bless you guys. Thanks for supporting us by listening. Take care.
If you are new to the podcast, be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform and join us next week for the next installment of the County Line Podcast.